We're very deep into fantasy football draft season at this point, but I also do know some people who have not drafted yet in fantasy football. So that's why I made this particular video, which is going to help those who have already drafted while also helping those who have not drafted find the right draft strategy and learn the best tips of how to win in your fantasy football league this year. So in today's video, we are going over the best tips and tricks to win your 2023 fantasy football league. Starting out with the first one, guys, this is easily the most important piece right here. If you do not have this particular one, you can never expect to win. The most important thing to know is to understand your league. And what I mean by that is you need to understand your scoring format. Are you a half PPR? Are you a full PPR? Are you a standard league? You also need to understand the team's format. So is your league a 1 quarterback, or maybe is it a 2 quarterback? Is it a 3 wide receiver? Is it a 2 wide receiver? So let's say we have 2 different guys here. Let's say we've got John and Jesse, and they both got completely different leagues. So John has a typical format, which most of the time on ESPN or Yahoo leagues is going to be a 1 quarterback, 2 wide receiver, 2 running back, 1 flex, 1 tight end, 1 defense, and 1 kicker. So that's a typical redraft format right there. Now let's say the other guy, Jesse, instead of that, he has a super flex format, which in this case is a 2 quarterback format. And he's also got 2 flexes instead of 1s and no kicker, but still has a defense. The way those 2 are going to be drafting are drastically different. And I'll give you an example right here. So John may start out with 2 running backs. And remember, John's league is typical. It's a 2 wide receiver, 2 running back, 1 quarterback, 1 flex type of format. He may very well start out with 2 running backs at the top of his draft. And the beauty about that is he still has top quarterbacks available round 3, round 4, round 5. If Jesse did that in his 2 quarterback system, he's getting Dak Prescott, Tua Tagovailoa, or Kirk Cousins if he goes quarterback starting round 3. So as you can see, we need to be 100% mindful of your league's format and how they are particularly mapping out positional importance in your particular league. So as I said earlier, the same thing applies to your scoring system as well. If you have a full PPR league, what this does is it favors wide receivers because every reception that wide receiver gets, it's 1 total point for you. So for example, a guy who has just been dominant in PPR leagues for basically a decade is Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen is a total target hog, but he really doesn't have that many big plays attached to him, and he typically doesn't score many touchdowns. Well, guess what? If he has a 9 reception week for 75 yards, that's 16.5 fantasy points right there in that particular week. Now, what's the difference here? Well, let's say that you like the more old school way of playing fantasy football, which is totally understandable. This makes it a lot harder if you still do play in standard scoring, which is no PPR at all. If you play in that particular scoring, take that same stat line and apply that for Keenan Allen in a standard league, and that's only 7.5 points. You're only getting the yardage points. So the standard scoring, as opposed to full PPR, actually gives the running backs more of an edge over the wide receivers at this point. Now here's the thing. If you have been following my channel for all offseason, you know that I've been hammering one thing home specifically. Always draft for ceiling. You never want to play fantasy football scared. You always want to draft the highest ceiling player at every position, and that's how you should draft. But unless we understand our particular league and how it is formatted with positions and scoring, it all means nothing. So my next tip here for you is actually a little bit more modern day. Like the first one was really in regards to, that's a pretty old school one that we all need to handle every single year in fantasy football. That will never change. This one is more recent, and the tip is, do not be scared of wide receivers with new quarterbacks in their offense. So let's look back at 2022, and I want to look back at a couple of guys in specific here. We are looking at Tyreek Hill, AJ Brown, and Devontae Adams. All 3 of those guys were entering new teams, coming into new offenses with new quarterbacks, and at the time, everybody perceived all 3 of those quarterbacks to be downgrades from where they were actually entering. And honestly, I would agree, all with the exception of AJ Brown, who absolutely got the quarterback upgrade with Jalen Hurts at that position. Well, they all crushed in fantasy football. In half PPR, let's look at what they did. Davante Adams, 16.8 fantasy points per game, wide receiver 2 in half PPR. Tyreek Hill, 16.6 fantasy points per game, wide receiver 3. AJ Brown, 15 fantasy points per game, wide receiver 5. All 3 of those guys were top 5 fantasy wide receivers on brand new teams, brand new offenses, brand new quarterbacks. And I honestly think that this particular one stems from people overthinking it, right? I think that when you think about a wide receiver going into a changed offense, some people just don't like the idea of change. But here's something we just cannot overthink. Great wide receivers are great wide receivers. And this year, we can compare those guys last year to a couple of guys this year. We've got Garrett Wilson, Davante Adams again, and Chris Olave. All of these guys are going at round 2 cost. Now, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, they have clear upgrades at the quarterback position. Garrett Wilson is going from a trio of garbage all the way to Aaron Rodgers in his 2023 season, and Chris Olave is going from a 2 quarterback clown show to Derek Carr, who has a very good deep ball and is very supportive of fantasy wide receiver 1s. Now, Davante Adams does have a downgraded quarterback going from Carr to Garoppolo, and his age definitely is a factor in all of this, but there is no question that all of these guys have top 5 upside. Now, the next one is also really important, and this one in particular needs to be implemented in basically every format right here. Do not go quarterback and tight end early on. Do not grab both of those positions in your top rounds. So let's say you want to implement a particular draft strategy. A draft strategy that I went over a couple of videos ago is the advantage that people are going to have this year with stacking a quarterback and a wide receiver on a particular team. So let's say you want to go after someone like Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen, Hurts and AJ Brown. I love that draft strategy. I think it's going to pay dividends for you this year. But if you plan to do this, do not pick a tight end early along with them. It is not going to work out good. You are sacrificing too much ceiling at deeper positions in your league. Like I said earlier, understand the format. If you're in a 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 2 flex type of league, even a 1 flex league, you still have so many spots that you need to fill out later on in the draft if you go quarterback and tight end very early. So let's look back to 2022 really quick. Now, Mahomes and Kelsey are obviously 2 of the greatest players in the NFL today. Both likely Hall of Fame guys, and they were excellent in fantasy football last year. They proved to be the most lethal fantasy football stack in all of 2022. Well, that's because Travis Kelce, you were getting him in either the 1st or the 2nd round, and you didn't have to pick Mahomes until round 4 or round 5 sometimes. You had at least 2 picks to fill in the meantime. Get yourself a top running back, a top wide receiver. Well, the difference here is that this year, Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes, if you want that stack, you have to get them back to back. They're going in rounds 1 and 2 of most fantasy football platforms this year. And the reality is, you are going to miss on so many top wide receiver and running back talent during the meantime, because you still need to fill at least 4 spots with 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers and another flex spot in the next 5 to 6 rounds here. And it doesn't just apply to Mahomes and Kelsey here. Let's say that you go Jalen Hurts and you get Mark Andrews around later. You're gonna have the same exact problem. You gotta fill too many spots that you're giving up too much ceiling on in important positions that you need more depth at. It honestly goes back to tip number 1, which is knowing your format. Now on this next one, I think we all need a breath of refreshing honesty in the fantasy football community. It is almost impossible to draft the perfect team in fantasy football. In most cases, you are going to come away regretting at least a couple of your picks in fantasy football drafts. But there is always a silver lining, which leads me to this next tip, which is to be active in your trades. So let's say that the draft ends up playing out where you end up stacking running backs or wide receivers early. There just wasn't any running backs that you liked at your positions early, or wide receivers, and you ended up just stacking at a particular position and getting all of that talent, and you may end up having some weakness there at a running back 2 or a wide receiver 2 there. What you need to do mid-season is you need to start looking across your league. See how everybody else in your league is doing. Because, for example, maybe your buddy in your league, let's say that your buddy in your league is 0-4, but what he has is a killer running back or a killer wide receiver that can absolutely help you out. Well, the thing you need to realize, if he's 0-4, he's getting desperate. Part of the art of making trades in fantasy football is targeting guys in your particular league that you know that you can benefit from and that they will also benefit from, or at least they think so. Because the other reality here is that most people in fantasy football, in your fantasy football league, most of them are just thinking of themselves. So what we do as smart fantasy managers is we set up a system and we trade them something so it makes it look like we're thinking about them as well, but we get what we want at the end of the day to put us over the top. And really the message here with this particular tip leads me into the next tip as well, because both of these tips right here, it just requires you to be active during your league season. If you're in a traditional redraft league, you absolutely have to be active with trades and playing the waiver wire, which is tip number 6. So what I'm going to do here is to illustrate how important the waiver wire is. I'm going to name off some guys for you. Justin Herbert, James Robinson, Jamal Williams, and Justin Fields. Yes, Justin Fields as well. All of those guys were at one time, a couple of seasons ago, or as recent as last year, waiver wire pickups that absolutely made the difference for whoever picked them up and probably won them a fantasy championship. You absolutely cannot ignore the waiver wire in your particular fantasy football league. And listen, I would love to come out here and say these guys in this year in 2023 are going to be the waiver wire guys right away that you need to get. It's not like that. We're not in the season yet, so we can't exactly predict who was going to be those particular guys in 2023, which is what requires us to be extremely active and extremely diligent throughout the season. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you can catch my weekly waiver wire and trade videos during every week of the regular season. And let's say you're drafting tonight. Let's say you have picks 1 or 2 or 3, and you want to know that particular draft strategy that is going to best suit you and have the best team in that particular range. Click on this video right here.